I'll give it a few more minutes in case somebody else wants to show up. But good morning, everyone. Oh, yes, treats are available here, some coffee and some light snacks if you are interested. All right, I guess I'll start and just so that we have enough time for our discussion and questions. Hello all, I'm Sambo Kirkman. I'm the Community Development Director here at the City of Tigard, and appreciate you all coming in. We have an agenda for today that's listed here, and I think it's on our screen too if you want to go to the next slide. And just for everybody to know, we are recording this for those that are not able to attend, and also to provide our council with kind of with a clear idea of what comments and feedback we've received during this meeting itself. And we will also have that available on our food cart webpage as well. So for today, we're going to start with introductions, talk a little bit about the purpose of this meeting, run into kind of a brief history of how the food cart regulations, and I have a wonderful panel here, which I'll introduce as well, to kind of talk about what you need to start a food cart here in Tigard. And then end with half of the meeting available for answering questions and taking comments that, again, we would like to take to our council. Just a few housekeeping items. We do have some coffee and some light snacks in the corner here. We also have a sign-in sheet for those who would want to kind of have us update you on the progress of this, as well as comment cards that we will include in our packets to our council. So, sure. Oh, yes, yes. Okay, and let's start with introductions of the Tiger's project team. I've introduced myself, and also I'll have our panelists introduce themselves as well. We've got, go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Wendell Kador. I'm a project manager in economic development. Nice to meet you all.
He's also going to be our moderator for the panel. Do you want to start, Joe?
Thank you. I'm Joe Coulter. I'm the Environmental Program Coordinator with Public Works, and I manage the FOG program.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Skylar Warren. I'm the Assistant Director for Community Development.
Good morning. I'm Mark Van Donlen. I'm the building official for the City of Tigard.
I'm Ashley Davis. I work with Washington County Environmental Health, and I'm one of the plan reviewers for new units and restaurants.
Morning, everyone. I'm Jeremy Mitchell with Washington County Environmental Health, and I'm the primary REHS investigator for the City of Tigard.
So again, we're all here. We thought it was best to bring some of our subject matter experts here to kind of talk about the food cart regulations as well as other permits requirements to start a food cart. One thing I will check, are we recording right now? Just to make sure. Perfect. Okay. All right. So next slide. Wanted to go over briefly what the purpose of today's meeting. We did implement new updates to our food cart regulations. Those regulations are in effect right now. And one of the purposes of this meeting is to tell you more about those regulations and how to work within them. I know there's been some interest in elements of it that you may have concerns about, and those are things that we are, of course, collecting through our feedback session, which is the latter portion of today's meeting, so that we can provide our council with an understanding of what concerns food cart owners, property owners, businesses have with regards to the regulations, so we can understand if there is a need to make modifications or not. But again, there's two elements today. The first part is really to give the community an understanding of how food carts are regulated here in Tigard. So with that, we're going to start with a quick brief history of food cart pods from Skylar. Next slide, Jill.
All right. So food carts, as you all know, are relatively new in the modern era type of food establishment. The city of Tigard first developed regulations for food carts back in, I think it was 2014. Those were based on existing codes and policies, and they covered, a requirement to get a business license, requirement to get health department permit, requirement for that it's on paved surfaces, et cetera. There were several of those regulations that were in place. It became clear after some time that one of the challenges with that code is that it didn't actually offer food cart operators a clear vested right to operate those food carts. And so with the Tigard Made project in 2024, which is a project that was looking at broadly all of our employment lands, our industrial lands, our commercial lands, we codified all of the regulations that were already in place and added some others. So beginning with that code in April of 2024, food carts at that point required, that started the process where they required a local land use permit to operate. It became clear to us that because we had not developed food cart regulations that accommodated this very specific use that is very different from a brick and mortar restaurant operation, that the bar for developing a food cart pod, especially that grouping of food carts that's 4 or more, was too high of a bar. And we wanted to create some new regulations that were tailor-made for that specific type of operation to lower the bar. So we developed those regulations, and those are the ones that were adopted in January 2025. And rather than going through a full site development review or a major modification, as was previously required under the Tigard Made code, now those food cart pods could go through a specific process that was just for food cart pods and just be subject to standards that really were tailored for that specific type of use. So there is a thread between all of these regulations, and that's part of the reason that we want to talk about the history here, because we want to make clear that, these regulations are codified in our development code, but they're not new, right? There's most of these were carried through from those regulations dating back to 2014. I think that's all I'd give on the history of that.
So we'll go to the next slide, which is what we need to start the food cart, a food cart in Tigard. Wendell here will moderate our panel here that will go over the different aspects of the food cart operations.
Thanks, Sambo. So who on the panel will tackle number 1, zoning and site approval? Would that be you, Skylar?
It's me again. So as with any development project in the city, or a new business or a change of use in an existing building, we always encourage folks to come talk to us in planning as a first step, right? Because this is really kind of the first regulatory step in the process. We do have planning staff who are dedicated to providing customer service. We have at least one planner dedicated during all business hours who's there to answer customer questions. So we really encourage you to reach out to them. If needed, we do also have translation services that we can provide for people who might have a primary language that's other than English. And I think we cover pretty much every language that is in Tigard that I'm aware of. They can help you walk through those regulations, understand what your process is going to look like from a land use planning side of things, and also to talk about what your fees and the timeline might be to get through that process. They can also help you understand what the regulations are that will apply to your cart or to your cart pod. And I will say that, I do think the code is fairly straightforward. Like I said, most of what applies to food carts now is a continuation of those previous regulations. And so the requirements are fairly minimal for a food cart. And I'll just kind of summarize by saying that, the goal of these regulations ultimately is to protect the public health, safety, and welfare. So as with all the code, our interest is in making sure that the public is protected as development is happening in our community.
Thanks, Skylar. Who on the panel can elaborate what waste management means?
Oh, okay. Okay, so as a city, we're co-implementers of Clean Water Sources permit with the state to regulate wastewater treatment. And kind of the basics of it is any food and beverage establishment has to have pre-treatment for their waste before entering the public system. And the reason being is as grease accumulates over time, it can constrict the pipe and restrict flow and cause problems with treatment plants, and also cause sanitary sewer overflows, which are actually unlawful. So that is the important why managing grease is important to the city and city, state, and clean water services for public health and safety, environmental safety, or health rather. What else? You want me to go further into that, or?
Please.
So to receive that treatment, every establishment has to have a grease interceptor before it discharges into our system, and it has to be properly maintained to a point where you don't see bypass of the fog into our system. And for food carts in particular, if there's another option where, and this kind of ties into the health department, where I think it is allowed to, correct me if I'm wrong, to have 20-gallon totes of a certain specification, and then it can be dumped into a dump facility at Clean Water Services, which is on Durham Road in Tigard. It's kind of the basics of it.
Thanks, Joe. Appreciate it. Number 2, building permits. Is that you, Mark?
Hi, again, I'm Mark Van Dalen. I'm the building official for the city. Yeah, there's like anything else, there's always choices that an applicant is going to make when they decide if they want to do a project in any city. And that starts with, for building codes, with determining whether you're going to have a more permanent type of food cart or if it's going to remain mobile. Because mobile carts that have their wheels still left on them and their tongues to pull them or whatever, or are self-contained vehicles that drive around are not regulated by the state building codes. So we would not issue a building permit. There is no requirement for a building permit for a mobile cart itself. But anything that you're going to attach to that in a permanent manner may or most likely would require a permit. So any electrical work that's done, any place would require a permit and inspection, for, putting in a temporary, not a temporary, but a power pole to plug in the units, from that, anything that's permanently hardwired, basically. So if somebody runs a cord over to a box that's been put in, that would not require an electrical permit. But if you're putting in a new electrical connection to plug into, that would require an electrical permit. This kind of crosses over on the waste management side with both the FOG program and with the county on how you decide that you're going to dispose of your wastewater. It can be disposed of in the city's sanitary system with some conditions, and if that if you decide that you want to basically hard pipe anything in the ground or whatever, that's considered plumbing, and that would require a plumbing permit. Many of the pods, like the one at the park down here, have a grease interceptor that's put into the ground. All of the units that are located there then drain in through the grease interceptor and then connect to the city sewer system. That's fine. That would be plumbing. The size of that would be based on the number of carts and different things that are happening there. But it can be done. That's probably the cleanest, and what we see at most food cart pods that you see around other cities. They determine that they want to treat that and connect permanently. So they have kind of like RV type connections for the actual food carts that would go into, and then that all goes into a grease interceptor, and then it goes in from there, treated into the city sewer system. So that's one option. There's other options where each individual unit can have their own grease interceptor. Those could be then connected to a plumbing, which would go into the city sewer system, but that would require, each individual cart having some type of a grease interceptor that is maintained before that water is dumped into the system. But the part where those RV type connections would be plumbing from there to the main line. Again, that's kind of, it crosses over between the health department and the FOG program on how that gets treated before it goes into the system. The other option that Joe spoke to a little bit is to contain the wastewater on site and then dispose of it in an approved manner, whether that's taking it to Clean Water Services. I know there's some companies that come around will pump and take away those, and clean out those tanks and the grease interceptors. So again, it's an option for the applicant on how they want to do it. What we want to just make sure is that grease doesn't get into the system and that it's treated before it's connected. And then whether a plumbing permit is required or not depends on how you lay it out, how you connect it, whether it's hard piped, whether it's on-site temporary. If it's on-site and being hauled away, it's not plumbing, and there would be no plumbing permit required for that. As far as water connection, any pipes going in the ground, any yard hydrant type connections would need to have a plumbing permit. If there's already potable water that's available, and you're hooking it up with a garden hose, health department may have some issues on that, but it wouldn't be plumbing. So there would be no city plumbing permit required if there's already existing water connection and a way to connect the carts to that water. So, but if you want to put in a series of yard hydrants, or you want to put in some other kind of a way to get the water to the cart, or anything that basically is in the ground and connected to the potable water system would require a permit and some kind of a backflow preventer to not allow contamination back into the system. So again, there's some choices that would need to be made by the applicant, but consider if it's in the ground and it's connected to the city system, those would require a permit for plumbing. Electrical is always going to require a permit, and then, if you choose to do on-site stuff that's hauled away, that's not in the ground and connected to the city systems, that would not require a plumbing permit. So I think we'll get to questions at the end if anybody has questions, but we'll move along here and let everybody get a chance to let you know what their requirements are before we get to that point. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Mark. Number 3 is SDCs, System Development Charges. Who can discuss that?
Okay. System development charges are charges that are levied on new development in the city that are for the purpose of mitigating the impacts of new development. The city provides transportation system, streets and roads, sidewalks, parks, as well as sanitary sewer and water service. So depending on the proposal that you have, you may have at least 2, but up to 4 system development charges that would apply to a new cart or a new cart pod. The two baseline charges are for transportation and parks, and those are based on the square footage of an average square footage of the interior of a cart, and the rate, the interior of the cart. So the general way that system development charges are levied are based on the square footage of the operation, as well as the classification of the operation. Under the Washington County transportation development tax rules, as well as the city's rules regarding system development charges, food carts are charged at the fast food service rate. And that's based on transportation studies that show the relative number of trips that are generated by a food cart as well as a fast food restaurant. So those are analogous. If your cart is going to entail what Mark's talking about, like an RV stand that would involve a permanent connection to the sanitary sewer, or if you're adding a water meter on the site to serve carts, those sanitary SDCs, as well as the water SDC, which is tied to the new meter fee, could also apply. But as a baseline, it is the transportation and the parks. Our practice of setting that rate at 120 square feet is in alignment with Beaverton, and it's actually lower than some other communities because we recognize that system development charges can be a burden. But we also have to recognize that in terms of equity, our brick and mortar restaurants are also paying those charges at the start of their business, and those are wrapped up into their operations. And so we need to be fair to everyone who's operating a food establishment within the city. Anything that you'd add on SDCs?
The other component of SDCs is that for a site to have a cart in, it's not a matter of every cart if a cart leaves the site, the site itself still has the SDC charges paid for. So if you were to replace that cart with a different cart on that site, we would not necessarily charge it. It's always for the new development that's coming in or an expansion of a use on a site itself. So for some food cart pods that have an interest in putting in, let's say, 4 food cart pods or for 4 food carts, the initial charge would be for those 4 carts. And as one cart leaves and another comes in, it's not necessarily another charge. It's just with that those charges have already been accounted for as part of that development. So SDCs are really intended to address an expanded use on a site.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. And I think it really is important for food cart pods because often these are new establishments that are going into a site that has already had development on it. And when those fees are calculated, there is an amount of credit that is granted based on the previous uses that are on the site. So in an instance where, say, you're going to locate a food cart pod on a site that previously had a fast food restaurant on it, you may not owe SDCs at all. It just depends on what the square footage of that restaurant is and the total number of carts that are on the site. So those two could cancel out through that crediting system. I would say most developed sites in the city have what we call vested SDCs, and so there's at least some reduction. Now, if a site is expanding and they don't have any vested SDCs, then new operations, whether it's a new brick and mortar or a new food cart, would entail the full system development charge.
Thanks, Skylar. Thanks, Sambo. Next is what is required from Washington County Health Department. Could you explain what is needed and what is an employee health permit and also a mobile food unit license application?
I'll start with the licensing portion. There are 2 ways you can go about it. You could purchase a unit that has already been licensed and reviewed by us, and then you would apply with us for a change of ownership. We would check to make sure that the tanks are the same as the previous owner, that you haven't changed anything, and then you would get your license right, within, you usually do it within 5 days. And then you can just start operating, and then you'll get your regular inspections. What most people end up doing is having a brand new unit. Ideally, we would want you to submit plans to us where you would have a schematic drawing of your mobile unit along with the application, some other forms you have to fill out that are all on our website, and you would pay a plan review fee. And we would review those plans. That process could take 2 to 3 weeks. I mean, it could take 1 week, who knows? Just depends on how busy we are. There's 3 people that do the plan reviews for Washington County. I'm one of them. And then there's Dawn and Jennifer. So probably some of you have worked with them. After we review the plans, we might come back to you and say that you have to fix something. If not, then you'll get a pre-op or a plan review approval letter and through your email. And once your truck is ready, it's finished, and you're ready to get inspected, you would pay you would apply for your license and pay the fee for the license for whatever year, 2025 or whichever year you're starting. And once you've paid, we can schedule to do a pre-opening inspection, and you're not allowed to operate until you've passed the pre-opening inspection. And I would say about a good portion of the time, there's something wrong at the pre-opening that someone will need to fix. Usually it can be something pretty simple. I would say the most common item is the prep sink or the 3-compartment sink. The indirect drain line might need to be trimmed so that it's not all the way into the sink, or a hub drain might need to be added. I would say that's the most common thing that's not ready to go at the pre-opening inspection. Once you pass the pre-opening inspection, you will get your license. Eventually, I'll notify the admin that they can send you your license. And but once you pass the pre-opening, you're allowed to operate right then and there. And then your regular inspector, which is one of the inspectors for Tigard, is Jeremy here. The other one is Don Ware. They'll come do a semi-annual scored inspection within 30 days, and then you'll get 2 of those inspections per year. And then food handler cards, everyone who works on the cart needs to have a food handler card within 30 days of hiring. Anything else you can think of, Jeremy?
I think so. I think maybe as far as like other permits, and this may be something that Ash can discuss, but it's talking about, I don't know if the slide's back there or not, but depending on specific operations, if you need additional permits such as catering. So mobile food carts aren't allowed to cater unless they have a commissary. So if you don't have a commissary, you're not allowed to cater.
Well, no, they would need to get it's very rare that these get approved, but you can ask for a variance from the state to do catering off of a mobile unit, but I don't know of any in existence. And I don't know how often they are approved in the state at all.
Yeah, exactly. And then also just commissaries. I know that's something that mobiles in general are they operate within their walls, right, of a mobile unit, right? So if you start to expand outside of that space and start storing food or equipment off the unit, that starts becoming either a warehouse license or a commissary license. And that's going to be depending on what you're doing in that space. If you're just storing single-use items or goods, that may be a warehouse license. If you're doing prep, which you're not allowed to do in a warehouse, then you need a commissary license at that time.
Right, thank you. Last but not least, the business license.
Good morning. I'm Tina Escalera, Economic Development Specialist here for the City of Tigard. So on business licensing, when you're operating a food truck or a food cart or a food cart pod, City of Tigard does require that you register your business with the state as well as obtain a City of Tigard business license. In order to register your business through the state, you will need to go through a website that we do have on some pamphlets in the back, but it's through the Secretary of State. You can file all these forms online as well as pay online. And the primary reason for that is to establish legal recognition of your business entity and to ensure compliance with state law. As far as the Tigard business license, the Tigard business license program is regulated through the Tigard Municipal Code. And it does require that any business that is within city limits to pay for a Tigard business license. You can actually get an application here either in person or online. And the way the process works is once an application is filled out, it can either be dropped off in person here in this building at our utility billing window, which is inside this building, or it can also be emailed to a business license email address that we do, I believe, also have on our website. The application is then reviewed. And then once the application is reviewed, you will get notification if it's approved and the amount that is due. The amount that is due is typically determined by the number of employees that you have working out of the food cart. And I've been told that you can receive a response within 7 business days as far as the status or the amount due. As Skylar touched on earlier, sometimes it does require the planning department to request additional information on it, but that will all be notified to you as well. Payment as well can either be made at the utility billing window, or they can also take a card payment over the phone. And then the license is mailed out to you as soon as the payment and approval have both been received. Good. Yeah, and then those fees actually go towards our commercial crimes unit, which is a unit of through the police department of detectives that actually focus primarily on just business support. So any sort of crimes that are done on the commercial level, that's where the funds of the business license go towards. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tina. Thanks to our panel. Now it's time for question and answer time. And what we're going to do is, thank you first, raise your hand. I'll come to you with the microphone so everybody can hear you. We're going to keep the interactions probably at 3 minutes so everybody has a chance to have a question answered. So, number one.
Thank you. Hello. I have a few questions, so I'll just rapid fire them. Based on 120 square foot condition, what is the typical SDC?
You could go to the next slide, actually.
Yeah, I think we actually have a slide here that shows what those fees are.
Also, if we build for 6 carts, let's say we build out plumbing and electrical for 6 carts, but we only have 4 active at the completion of the build, are we liable for SDCs for 6 units or 4 and build out 2 when they come in, or do we pay the whole nut up front?
So if you're doing 6 carts, then you're into the food cart pod area. So you would come in with a proposal, an application for a food cart pod, and what would serve you best. It's sort of, as Mark said, it's kind of up to you what you want to do, but it would probably serve you best to go ahead and get approval for the maximum number of carts that you intend to have. You would have to pay SDCs based on that number of carts at that time, but then you can fluctuate. If you have 4 carts for a period of time, you can go up to 6. You can drop down to 5 if someone moves out. If someone else comes in, you're back up to 6. But you're going to be vested into that maximum number of carts based on the application that you made. Alternatively, you could come in for a 4-cart pod application, meet the criteria under the planning, the development code at that time. And then later on, if you wanted to add 2 carts, you could come in and do another food cart application that would allow you to modify that to go up to the additional 2 carts.
Thank you for clarifying. So we have applied and have been approved for a certain amount of carts. We've been doing this process for several months with the city of Tigard and have had several meetings regarding this. This is the first time that an SDC has been brought up to us. And with 6 carts, we're liable for $51,059.20 to the city and county. That is a significant figure that is now being brought to my attention during this meeting.
Okay, okay. I'm assuming we're talking about the Broadway Carts facility. That's a good example of one where prior to the establishment of the food cart regulations, three of those carts had already been approved for usage on the site itself. So as you expand, that is where we would look at the STC charges for the carts itself. So it is not for all of those, and that's the thing that we've tried to clarify is that there has been established food carts throughout Tigard, and we've acknowledged that. We've actually provided an opportunity for people to come in and talk to us about that. And for those that have been established and based on the timelines that we provided, are ones that we would not request the SDC charges for. It is merely for those after the January 28th date. Any new food cards that have come in would be required to address the system development charges. Because again, part of the analysis, I should probably stand up. Part of the reason for the food card updates was to acknowledge that these are businesses and the businesses themselves have an impact to the system similar to any other brick and mortar facility itself. That's why part of our analysis has been to understand, well, we know it's not a brick and mortar site. It still does need to acknowledge that the impacts are there. And that is where we were able to figure out the calculations for the STCs and why we landed at 120 square feet for a cart.
I think that point that Sambo is making is important, and I want to drive it home. We're not looking to apply system development charges retroactively. So if you have a legally established food cart in the city of Tigard that predates these regulations, we are not assessing system development charges for those carts. New carts, which are considered new development in the city, would be assessed system development charges moving forward. We generally don't apply SDCs retroactively, and we were actually in the minority. We might have been the only city in the metro region that was not charging system development charges for carts. I know that Beaverton does, Portland does, and I think Gresham does as well. There's several other communities that we've checked with that also charge them. So the fact that we were not charging them for that period of time represented an inequity between what the regulations that we were applying to our brick and mortar food operations versus what we were applying to our food carts.
Thank you. Next questions?
Yes, thank you. My question has to do with the overall. We in our and the cards think there needs to be some significant changes to the code to work. So can you explain to me, what's going back to the city council? And I think the May 6th meeting, how we can get those in there, and are you looking to make major changes at that meeting? Or how far down the road can this process help or happen till we can get changes made? I mean, could they happen at the May 6th meeting, or is it further down the road?
So any legislative change requires time, right? So this feedback, any feedback that we hear today will be helpful. We'll take the information that we gather, we'll go back to council, and council will give us a decision about whether they want us to go back and make some further amendments, or whether they're satisfied with the code as it's currently written. We do this kind of process improvement work with our code all the time. In fact, the most recent food cart regulations were a process improvement project that was born out of the deficiencies in what we had from that Tigard Made code that I mentioned before. Legislative processes do take time. So I want to be clear that, this is not something the council could, on their May 6th meeting, make changes to the development code, because we are governed by regulations at the state level about, you know, proper notice for these things. And as a community development team, we would want to be able to vet any proposed changes with the variety of stakeholders that are out there. You know, I think from my experience, at a minimum, I mean, this was a fast project and it took us about 6 months to get through. I think that's probably a realistic timeframe for those kinds of changes. There is a minimum of, I think, 35 days notice to the Department of Land Conservation and Development for code changes. So that's baked in as 1 month already. And then we have to go to Planning Commission before going to council. And that's usually a month out as well. So with those two things, you're talking about like at bare minimum 2 months. So I just want to you know, make sure that we're very clearly communicating what the procedural framework is that we operate under when we make code changes.
Well, it depends. Does anyone else have questions? Raise your hands if you do. Thank you. Can I take this one, Skylar? I'll be frank. Denise is a prime example. I'm sorry, it's okay for me to use her name. Denise is a prime example of this, where we were, as our new codes were implemented in May, Denise did approach us on the conversation of how to handle the food cart or her food cart pod, and we were quite surprised at some of the responses we got from ODOT as well, and that's part of the reason we proceeded with doing the updates to the processes to the regulations. We understand that it may be a bit surprise for food cart owners that may not have had to go through any process, but what we realized was that by not having a food cart application and by not being very clear as to what the process are, we weren't able to capture comments like from ODOT prior to it to be able to say, here are things you need to understand. So the land use application for food cart pods allows us the opportunity to talk to our agency partners, similar to Washington County, to be able to say, what are the issues? Because again, in this instance of this food cart pod, it's slightly different because ODOT is a key stakeholder of that site. That's not always going to be the case for all food cart pods. And that is the opportunity this application process provides us, is the ability to be able to help you navigate those conversations, both with the city as well as our partners on what you need to know. And part of the clarity was understanding what do we need to know standard wise when it comes to layouts of carts, understand what the impacts are. So that again, I realize that this may be a bit difficult, but part of this is to be very clear as to what food cart operators should be considering when they come into putting in new food cart businesses here in the city.
And you know, I want to acknowledge the challenge in the situation that you're describing, which is doing development adjacent to a state facility. I will also highlight that it's not isolated to food carts. This happens with all development that happens along those state facilities. So we frequently see this with anything that's happening along 99W. We have a fast food restaurant proposal that's in right now, and they're in extended, I think, conversations with ODOT about what the requirements will be for being able to develop that site because of the queuing and traffic generation concerns that ODOT has. So I want to simultaneously acknowledge it, what you're saying, but also let you know that it's not isolated specifically to food carts. We see this frequently with other development, even with non-food establishments. It's a I don't know if I would call it a problem. It is a requirement of ODOT that they are able to mitigate impacts to that state facility for safety and throughput reasons.
Next questions?
I just have one more quick comment before, and this is not a building requirement, but it is a little bit of a crossover. One thing that we didn't put in the how-to guide is that restroom facilities are required. That's through the health department. You do have to provide, before you can open a mobile food unit, there has to be some availability of restroom facilities to service that. So I don't know.
We do allow porta potties, but you need to have a hand sink with hot and cold running water. It does, I mean, it doesn't need to be within the porta potty, but and it is possible. They do have these sinks where they have they're plugged in and they're outside of the porta potty. So we also do allow a restroom agreement, but the restroom has to be within 500 feet of the mobile unit.
And I'll just add from a city standpoint, we do require, I think we don't require restrooms for the 1 to 3 cart situation. So it's just food carts. Once you get into a food cart pod, we do require that permanent restroom facilities are provided on the site, and that's for health, safety, and welfare of the public that's visiting the food cart pod, but also just to provide sanitary facilities for the employees on the site as well.
It wasn't clear to me reading what I read. So my question is it 3 food carts per address, or is it 3 food carts per tax lot? What is the ruling? What's the requirements? It's 4 carts or more become a pod, correct?
I'm going to read from the code so that I don't misdirect you. It's on subject property, so it's per property.
Subject property means what?
The boundaries
Specifically,
of a legal lot.
is
So
that a tax lot or an address?
it's not an address, it's a tax lot, essentially. Although there's a small asterisk there. Sometimes there are tax lots that are recorded with the county that are not considered legal lots for development purposes. That's increasingly rare, but it does happen. So essentially it's per legal lot for the purposes of land use. Like 97% of the time, those are the same as the tax lot.
Is it typical for 2 addresses to share the same tax lot?
That happens frequently. You'll see a strip mall that might be on one lot, but each suite will have its own street address sometimes, or sometimes they'll just have a street number. It varies depending on when the property was first developed and how it was developed. So, but there's not a direct correlation between a separate address and a separate property. Yes, you can use Tigard maps, and that will show. Also important to note that under the code, I believe properties that are adjacent to each other that are contiguous and under common ownership, so the same ownership, are treated as a single lot under certain circumstances. So that depends on, kind of what's being proposed or whether it's a legal non-conforming use. But, again, I encourage anyone who has questions about that to reach out to our planning staff, and they can walk you through that based on the circumstances specific to your property.
One more question. So if there's two addresses and they're owned by the same entity, but you cannot get to either address unless you hit 99 or a major street, they're not connected. You can't drive through. How does that apply?
I think,
Yeah, I think that one's probably getting too specific for me to answer without.
Well, I was just curious about like what the due process was, because you guys said Washington County and like Beaverton and places like other places like that, they have really good food pods and they're right on major roads. I know you guys did mention like ODOT and stuff. Did you guys go to them and talk to them, and like what's the process there? Like why doesn't Tigard have any of this? I'm just kind of curious.
Can you be more specific about what are the specific things that are in Washington County or Beaverton that? Sure. So we did talk with staff in other jurisdictions about their regulations. And we didn't really look at the ODOT piece because ODOT is ODOT is going to apply their same standards across really the state, not just in Tigard. So if there are impacts to an ODOT facility in Beaverton, very likely that ODOT is requiring some kind of mitigation there. But yes, we did look at best practice across the metro region and what other jurisdictions were doing to regulate food carts. Can you, Deb?
Skylar, I want to thank you for that great explanation to my last question on those details, but just want to be clear. How about that? That's better. Okay. Skylar, I want to thank you for that detailed explanation to my last question. But I just want to be clear. Do any changes to the code, now how minor, what do they need to go through that whole, what you'd say, 6 months process or whatever that is, or can you make little tweaks without going through that whole process?
Yeah, so the short answer is no. Everything that touches Title 18, which is the development code, requires that process, and that's under state law.
Okay. Well, I would like to suggest a solution that would help these folks, our neighbors down at the Broadway, food carts and us. We were both caught in the same thing. We were in the midst of developing a pod, and the rules were changed. And that for both of us has created a lot of hardship. And we thought we were playing by all of the rules. And I proposed to some of you before, is that we do a slight a slight change to the non-conforming. And it would allow us both to go up. I think theirs would fit under the same thing. If we're allowed to have, 3 carts per tax lot, then we could go, and I'm abbreviating this, we could go under non-conforming. And that would be fair to us because we were trapped in the changing of the codes and we didn't know that they were happening. And our pods would be nice pods. We think it'd be very fair to the city. The city deserves food carts. And we would both be limited to 6. We're both on pavement. I think it would be a very fair solution. And the details are too much to go into this meeting, but I would really like to have a discussion where we could sit down together and go into all the details of what would be done to make those changes, even if it takes that time, to see if the planning department would support us, to see if the council will support us. Because right now we are stuck in no cart land. And like you said, to go 6 months to changes, and after that, then would have to, I believe, the type 2 application requires another 10 weeks. So I mean, we are really stretched out there. So I'm proposing that we sit down and go through the details of that. It's too much for this meeting now, of course, but that's my request.
Thank you for that. I do want to highlight that new codes, when they take effect, do not apply to applications that are in process with the city at the time that the new regulations take effect. So in other words, if you came in today and applied under the current code for a development, and then 2 weeks from now the code changes, you get to come in under that old code. Anytime that you come in after the code, you are subject to the new regulations. So I don't know that there's we can look at it. I don't know that there's like a method to retroactively apply non-conforming circumstances to things that were not in process. The way that regulations are changed is to change them based on the effective date of the application to the city. So maybe that is like really a word salad and doesn't make a lot of sense, but happy to talk about it more one-on-one or however you'd like.
Thanks, Skylar. Next question.
Can you be more specific? I heard you earlier say that you didn't have an issue with the standards themselves. Are you speaking of a reasonable accommodation related to the fees? Is that what I'm?
Well, just to be clear on the fees that you're talking about, The fees, there's multiple, and I'm assuming you're talking about the system development charge fees. The system development charge fees are based on certain things, like with water or sewer. It's based on the actual meters that are created for it. So, like your water meter, you're absolutely right that a business may only have one meter, but that's kind of a choice that that business has. If they chose to split it and have two businesses in that same building and they asked for another meter, we would be charging them for that meter as well. So are you taught? Okay, well, and I would we could check on your proposal here, but when we talk about meters, the question I would say is how many meters did you have? And if it was 1 meter, then that's really all the water charges that we charged for you was for that 1 meter. Now, when we're talking about the individual carts, there's multiple charges that we're talking about. The individual cart charges that we're talking about when it comes to the transportation charges or the park fees have to do with the individual carts themselves. It's almost as though if a restaurant were to expand by 120 square feet. That is what we're looking at in those specific individual cart charges. And what we're trying to explain for pods is that once you've paid that additional fee for, let's say, 3 new carts. I'll use your site as an example. If you were to put 3 new carts in, that's 3 new transportation and park fees because those are specific to that type of use. It would be as though a business, a brick and mortar were to come in and do 3 different expansions on their buildings. We would say, you've added 120 square feet. Therefore, we're going to charge you this additional transportation fee because of the impacts associated with it. If you have paid the $8,500 for that specific cart, then if that cart leaves and a new cart takes its place, no. It is a one-time fee for an expansion of a use on a site. No. That is a choice between the property owner and the business. And this is the part that the city just does. The city really won't get into, is that it's either the property owner or the business that decides who will pay the fee that for this expanded use on a site. So if it's a pod development, they may pay the whole thing, or they may say, nope, I don't want a pod. I'm going to allow this waffle house to be a waffle cart to be located on the site. You, as the cart owner who has an interest in being in my parking lot, will have to pay that fee because it has no. And again, it's really dependent on what. That's a private matter in our eyes. Yeah. Mm-mm. Once. No. Yeah. No. Yeah. Most of it is envision the STCs as being something where if you're expanding something on it, I'll put monopoly. It's like putting an extra house or the hotel on there. As you add that, that's what we're charging for. And we acknowledge that it is difficult to think about that additional cost. However, for the site itself, there is just some impacts associated with it. So that is again a choice between the property owner and the food cart operator as to who pays that for that new use on the site or that expanded use. Do you want me to answer this one too?
Yeah, I think it needs to meet the regulations for the non-conforming circumstances. So if it was established prior to that date, it has not moved from the site and it was illegally established and it has the fog management, then it's considered legal non-conforming and it can continue. The legally established entails having the business license and the health department permit. Those are generally the two parameters that we require. And again, that dates back to the origins of food cart regulations back in 2014, 2013. We always required those, and that's always been the means of establishing the legal operation of it on that date, as well as any land use that applied at that time.
Oh, can I follow up on that too? Because you seem to be talking about your site. I prefer not to, but for sites in which a temporary use permit application was submitted for 3 carts, that still applies. It's an established that has been established through the process prior to it. Because again, we're talking about prior to May, we had no application process for it. So after May, we acknowledged that for food carts, if they went through a temporary use application, that would be considered compliant with our code. And so yeah.
So I think we're getting into specifics of certain sites, and that's probably less valuable. I think we're happy to talk with you online. But like Sambo said, you had a land use approval that was effective prior to that date. So the system development charges would have been assessed at the time of that permit. So like I said, yeah, we're not retroactively applying system development charges.
I just wanted to piggyback on your waffle cart comment. So it probably makes sense for the property owner to pay those system development fees, because if the property owner talks to the cart owner and they decide that the cart owner is going to pay the fees, in this case, I'll use waffle cart as an example. If the waffle cart leaves after that point and then they're replaced by a new cart, wouldn't the new cart be subject to those fees again?
Again, no. Once the waffle cart pays that fee on the site, if it leaves and it comes back and a ice cream cart comes there in its place, there is no additional STC fees to it. Now with that in mind, that is again, it's a conversation between the food cart operator and the property owner, as we can't require a specific person to pay it. We just have to acknowledge that a new use is on the site. And when that is asked, that is when we acknowledge that there is a charge to it. And so that is kind of a conversation food cart operators should have with their property owner as to how they want to handle that fee.
I want to follow up on my last one. Would you be willing to give us a meeting before the city council discusses this, for we can try to find some relief for its existing cart owners, or whether it's what I'm proposing or somebody else proposing? And I mean, because we're really trapped here in a, like I said, in a no cart land. So would you give us that meeting?
I think we're always happy to meet with folks. So just reach out to us and we'll work with you.
But no, I'm looking for a commitment here that we're bringing all the stakeholders like this and sit down and discuss it, and not just an informal meeting, which we've had a lot of before. And I appreciate your time. They just weren't very productive. So can we have that, I guess you'd call it, official meeting to have that discussion?
Well, this is your official meeting for a discussion. We're here to talk about it. What I will tell you is that we are willing to talk. I would prefer to talk to each individual cart owner, because again, in a public forum, I would like the I'd like the opportunity for food carts, specific questions to food carts be for them to be able to have answered. Because again, not all of you are in the same situation. But what we're willing to do is tell you what we know about our codes and tell you how we can. It has to be compliant to the codes that are available right now. So when you ask for accommodations, it's a matter of what is it that you're asking for? Is it compliant with the codes? So are we willing to talk about what the code says and what the code requires? We're happy to do that, and we're happy to navigate the conversations, much like we just did here now, where we could talk about the individual properties and what's different about it. I'm sorry, Denise, I'm using it. There's some that may have permits, and to understand what that means to expand is different than maybe what is on your property or somebody else who has just an interest in opening up a cart itself. But again, if there are questions about changes to the code, we're happy to take that information down and relay it to our council, but that will require us to go through the actual legislative process. So, I fondly quote a mentor of mine that says, the code is pretty specific and what it says is what we have to abide by. So I urge all you all to come in and talk to us. We want to be able to give you the right information and how to comply with the codes that we have here. If you do not like the codes or have comments about it, we will take those comments in and provide that feedback to our council and weigh those options, because I may hear from you all that you do not like the STC fees that we have here. We will relay that to our council, but the council will have to balance, how does the STC fees for a food cart compare to a brick and mortar? And is it fair? And that is something that we wrestle with often, is to understand that you have a very specific use in mind, and you have very specific needs for your businesses. But there are other businesses that we take into consideration as well, and we try to balance that. So George, I am happy to sit here and talk to you more about it, but I want to be very clear that what we can do and why we set up this meeting as such is to explain to you what the codes say now. We will help you guide you through the code process that's there. And then we will follow that up with a conversation with our council to say, here's what we heard about parts of the codes that folks don't like. But I think that allows us to put everyone on an even playing field, both food cart owners as well as businesses, because for us to make an exception means that we're not complying with our rules.
Okay, well then if you're not willing to organize a meeting, if we would get together, the stakeholders that we could find and set up a specific meeting for that, would you come to that meeting and have that discussion with all of us if we organized it?
I'm happy to have any discussions you would like, George. My only ask is that you understand that there is a process for changes, and we will relay those. I'm happy to lay those out for anyone who wants to talk about it, but I will have to comply with what our codes are. So if you want to sit down and game plan how your business, how we can work with this, I'm happy to do that. But I will always respond with, here's what the code says, and this is what needs to be complied with. But yes, absolutely.
Well, that's exactly what I'm trying to do. That's exactly what I'm trying to do here. Because, before these discussions haven't been fruitful. So I'm trying to get us so we can all be on the same page. Invite members of the council. They have shown a lot of interest in this. They make the changes. So we can discuss how we can get some relief, in an organized way. Because sure, I can make my request, but I don't know how it affects other people. They have different requests. There's people that are infected that aren't even here in this meeting. So I think, I would hope the city would recognize the situation, and you have tonight, I guess it's this morning, that we've been put in with the changing codes. And we think it's fair to the city that you would say, okay, we put you folks in a tough spot here. We got laws we have to follow, but we're going to really try to make it fair to you and the other, citizens of the city that want to come to our food carts and and so that's why we're asking for this accommodation, to really have a serious look at this.
I want to make sure that everyone's on the same page. What I hear I've not heard comments about specific standards that are you have concerns about. It's more about non-conforming circumstances. In the situation where a project, a development, is not subject to new standards or current standards, it is still subject to the standards that were in place prior to the new standards. And so even if the code offered a dispensation or a relief from what is currently in place, the standards that had been in place since May or the standards that were in place prior to May of 2024 would all still apply. So there is no circumstance where we generally go back to a development and say, okay, we grant you a non-conforming circumstance where no standards at all apply. Non-conforming circumstances are about what period of time in the code you are vested into. And as I said before, the way that you vest yourself into a version of the code is to submit an application under that code. And right now, we don't have a pending application from anyone that would fall under the older rules.
I guess, Skylar, what you just said is exactly the way we're having the problem. Because I've tried to open up a discussion about ways to change it to the department before. And what I hear is what the code says. I don't hear any curiosity about what we're proposing, how it would fit. I hear no curiosity. I just hear, this is what the code said, this is what and you know, it's a good conversation to talk about what the code says. But unless you folks have some curiosity, unless you want to hear what I have to say, it's not really a very productive conversation.
Yeah. So the specific circumstances for every development are going to be different. And this is where I really encourage you all to reach out to our professional planning staff at the counter, who can walk you through what steps you have remaining on the land use side. We've also provided this packet that organizes, we think, pretty well all of the various permits that might be implicated in adding new food carts or expanding an existing food cart pod. So, oh, it's back on the check-in table, I believe. Yeah. So we recognize that, you know, sometimes getting through government processes can be complicated and confusing, and we've tried as much as possible to lay out as best as we can the specific provisions that would apply to someone who's adding a food cart. It may not be comprehensive, right? There might be some moments where you find that there's some other regulatory agency that has come into play, but we think that we've worked, and ODOT is a great example, but we think we've worked with our building department, our Washington County peers, our business licensing folks, and others to put together what we think is the best, at least information to get you started and point you in the right direction to get there. And as always, we're incredibly happy to help business owners get started in the city. Our planning staff is here to help. Our economic development staff is here to help. We provide a lot of coaching services. There's grant opportunities. Really encourage you to reach out to us and utilize the resources that we provide.
I just have two questions, an easy one and a harder one. You said this meeting was being recorded. Will it be published to the city YouTube page? So eventually it'll be up there. Okay, and then I've talked to several of the food cart operators, and one of the situations that a few of them have brought up was when the emergency meeting was called earlier this year in front of City Council. They all say that they received no notice whatsoever of that meeting. I was wondering if you can comment on that, and if there wasn't any notice provided, why wasn't there?
I'll answer the first one. So we can get you a copy of it. Also, we do have a web page for food carts, and so this will also be this recording will also be there as well. So the link will be there. To be clear on the emergency clause was not an it's a tool that we have to be able to say we would like to start the adoption of the code sooner than waiting the 30 days. And part of the reason we did that was because at the time our process and the way that Skylar had explained it is perfect, which is if you decide you're going to submit in an application right now, we would be compelled to have you meet all the requirements that are available right then and there. So if we did not have a food cart application process, so what that meant is that if you submitted an application um, January 27th, then we would have had to run you through basically a larger and more extensive application process. It's our development review application process. That meant that we would need things like we would potentially need to have you look at getting a transportation analysis. It might have required you to go and I'm trying to think of other applications off the fly. But there are multiple other requirements with our larger applications. And again, brick and mortar is a good example where if you're going to build something more substantial, we're going to require you to do more studies and evaluations. We were trying to set the application process available as effective the date of it. So the emergency component of it was just a matter of saying, we think we should have a process that was clearer for folks to be able to submit their applications in because we were getting applications in for it. And what we were doing during the process was have them go through what's known as a pre-application conference. So you had to come into a meeting first just to talk about your application, and then you would have to go through another application. So instead of doing all that, we said, why don't we create a food cart process that would allow you to just submit that application in and address specifically the standards of food carts instead of having to address the issue, larger issues that we normally would have with larger developments. So that was why it was an emergency clause. It was not changing anything when it came to what we would review. It made it clearer because as applicants were coming in and looking at food cart applications, we were asking the same questions. How is your spacing between your carts? Is your cart fully on a paved surface? How are you planning to connect into your fats? How are your fats, oils, and greases? Those questions were still being asked. The difference was it wasn't very clear. And so we said, let's make sure the standards are clear. Here are what you need to specifically know. It did not mean that on January 28th, we weren't requiring that. We were having those conversations. What are you going to do if you decided to put a canopy or awning? Do you have a bathroom? Those questions were still being asked. The only difference is we didn't have clear direction for food cart vendors who are coming in because they're like, well, what do we need to know? And so hopefully, is that?
Yeah, and I will add to that, as Sambo said, the types of applications that food cart pods were having to go through before required neighborhood notice. It required that pre-application conference. Those all require fees. They require additional time. And there were just standards that were like I said earlier, like a higher bar than what we thought should apply to food cart pods because they are this kind of unique type of use. The other thing is that we have increasingly seen problems with fat, soils, and grease management in food carts and food cart pods in the city. And, Joe is out there, every day seeing these things. We really needed to get a handle on very specific standards for that. And we knew that there were food cart operators that were, essentially waiting. So that was the idea behind the emergency. The other thing is, to your point about notice, we we invited the 3 food cart entrepreneurs, pod entrepreneurs that we knew of in the city who are interested in those operations to come sit with us, go over the code. Yeah, so it was Broadway Furniture, Key, and then the Lou Sports Bar, although I think they have a different name now. We didn't know that you had an application in because we didn't have a permit in. We Right, so those are considered legal non-conforming, and we definitely didn't reach out to the legal non-conforming carts because we were allowing them to continue their operations. Well, let me finish my point. We invited the 3 that we were aware of because they had come into the city and asked for permits or they had asked for guidance. Of those 3, one of them sat and met with us and went through the code. The other 2 opted not to. We went to our council in December. We told the council that these regulations are coming. That was part of a public meeting. We provided required notice under state law, posted it on the city's website. It's on the council agenda. We provided notice to DLCD. So we complied with all of the noticing requirements. And, in conversing with the food cart pod potential operators, we were letting them know that this was coming as well. So, I think both from a regulatory standpoint, but also from a community engagement standpoint, we did our best to make sure that people knew that this was coming for consideration.
Well, we won't discuss that on here just because we want to focus on what we can tell you we know. So I'd probably defer to just maybe acknowledging that. Could we, is there an opportunity for us to always improve our notifications? Yes. Do we know that, George, you were working on a food cart pod? No. And well, George, we didn't have a temporary use application in for your additional pods or your additional carts. So again, there are times, again, I will own that we may not be perfect, but our attempt was to try to, as our very best, to bring in the stakeholders we knew of. I will say that we did also reach out to our chamber partners to say, business wise, what do we need to understand about the standards and how and were they reasonable? And we got some key comments back, and we tried to incorporate that in as best we could.
With that, I have a question. Megan DeSalvo, Tigard Chamber, thank you for having the meeting today. The SDC charges, can you tell me a little bit about how long businesses have to pay those and how far in advance they understand how much they're going to owe?
So it's harder to answer for the water and the sanitary sewer because it's really dependent on what you're proposing. Once someone has an idea of what they want to do on the site, whether it involves a water meter or a new sanitary connection, that kind of thing, our staff in the utility billing department, which they issue water meters, that kind of thing, and they do the charges. They can tell you what your water meter fee will be. You can also, any business that's looking to operate in the city can reach out to our SDC coordinator, and I think we have that in the packet. If we don't, we can follow up with it. Her name is Danielle, and she can provide estimates of your system development charges based on your proposal. at best, they're estimates. We can't give you a 100% guarantee because, your proposal could change a little bit from the time that you're exploring things and you come in for a permit. But you'll at least be able to get that estimate. In the city of Tigard, we now allow deferral of system development charge payment until your final inspection or your final occupancy permit. So if you're a food cart, where you may not have that building permit trigger, if you're not doing any building stuff, then that fee would be due at the time that you get your land use approval, I suppose, right? Or it would be due at the time of application. We'd have to look into that more, but because it doesn't have that final inspection trigger, it would be due a little bit earlier in the process. But if you're brick and mortar, generally you can defer to the point when you get your final inspection under the building code.
And specific to food carts, again, we won't know what the fees are for the water and sewer based on if they're self-contained or not. But the calculations that we provided, or one that we felt is a standard that we would use for food carts as we move forward. The $8,000 is what we found to be a reasonable amount based on the square footages and understanding its impact as a food establishment.
Sambo, in our organization, we don't expect people to be perfect. We expect people to have learning experiences, but we do expect them when they have those learning experiences to be open to people's comments about how they could do it better and make accommodations. That's really what we're asking. We're not asking for you folks to be perfect. We're just asking for you folks to, reach out to us now and help make accommodations for some people. Got, as you said, don't expect it to be perfect, but to try and make us whole. That's what we're asking for.
Well, George, accommodations for that I see we can offer to you is the ability to walk you through the process and figure out how the codes work within your development itself. As for we may differ in what we think accommodations are. I still have to be compliant with the codes that are there at the time. So what I can offer to you again is to sit down with you and go over your proposal with what the code says, because what the code says is what we would expect any business to meet coming into here to the city of Tigard. And that is what I can offer you, is that we are here to support you as best we can, as we would support any other business coming in and any other food cart operations that has an interest here in the city.
But you created a code, and I've given you examples. That's for us to go through your 10-week process, just the fact the way that code, it's not because we don't have a good pod. Our pod is, it's everything, it's healthy, it's meats. It just doesn't fit your code. And that's because the code was written unworkable. That's just the bottom line here. And as you and I sit down and we've gone through it before, we're that square peg you're trying to shove in a round hole. The bottom line is you folks created code. You didn't take enough input from existing pod people. It's an unworkable code. And now you're asking us to go through a 10-week process and pay all the fees. That we're undoubtedly going to fail because your code is unworkable. And going through it more and more doesn't make it workable. We're asking for you people to just give us a break and acknowledge you're not perfect, acknowledge we're not perfect, and try to find a solution that'll work for everybody. And explaining the code to us and trying to sit down and go through the code is not helpful anymore. We've done that. It's not helpful. We have to accept the realities of it and try to do the right thing, which is help the people that got cut in, when the new codes were, whatever the word would be, we were left out in the cold. So so to speak. That's what we're asking for. And I'm not hearing that curiosity today about how that could work, why it would work. We would like to sit down and talk to you. I'm hearing about, we're going to go through the code again. We've done that before. The code is unworkable. And I've got lots of examples here I brought in about why the code is unworkable, but we ran out of time. I don't have time to go through them, but I would, you know, if you're open to discussing why the code is unworkable, you know, then that would be a great conversation to have.
I think it would be helpful to get some examples. I'm hearing that you think it's unworkable, but the solution that you're suggesting is that there be no standards that apply.
No,
Can
that's
you
not
give
what
an give us an example of? It would be helpful to know what standards particularly you think are unworkable.
Let's start with one. There's lots. That carts not be located on a utility easement. Right through where our pod is, there are two utility lines buried. One is a gas and one is the electric, and they're way down in the ground. And there's no way we could make our pod work without putting them on top of those utilities. And we think that's a great use for that space. We can't build a building on it. So why not put a food cart on it that's mobile? You know, if someday they want to dig up the utilities, no problem. Just move the food cart out of the way. That one there alone shuts us down. And there's several others that if you'd like, I'd be happy to go into. I can even give you this after the meeting if you would like. Would you like more examples?
Sure, if you want to give us a couple more. But I want to note that we're close to time here, so.
Hold on, it's been a long emotional meeting. Certainly, here's an excellent one. You know, the fogs, the fat oils and grease. You know, we have carts that produce zero. I mean, and then we have other carts that do an excellent job of managing those so they don't go in the wastewater. And we want to, and if to put in a pod in, all of our wastewater has to go through a central, you know, fat, oil, and grease elimination system. And because the configuration of the pod, it takes so much money to get all that plumbing in and to get that central one in for nothing. I mean, the question is, how much fog does an average food cart produce? If this assumption is that all food carts are producing all these fogs and it's this great, you know, and a plugged up sewer system is a bad thing. But let's be realistic about it. All of our home kitchens produce fogs, right? And we don't require grease removal systems on them. So why are we creating a grease removal system on a food cart that doesn't produce any fogs? And you can easily see if the cart has potential to producing fogs if you look inside. And you know, if there's no deep fat fryer and that type of thing, it's not producing any. And if they're managed correctly, they won't go into this system. So that's another one. The cost prohibitive of that one will put us out of business.
Thank you for those examples. We'll gladly take your written comments. Yep. I think that.
If you have the right similar to the why, we'll give you the hows and whys of the requirements for the fog and all that. So yeah, if you want to leave it with us, we're happy to take your comments and respond to them. With that, we are at 10 minutes over. So sorry. Is there any other additional comments? If there is, we're happy to answer them. If not, like I said, this is being recorded. We will put together a summary of the meeting itself and of course, send it out to those who have put their emails there so you can see what is available. We have comment cards as well. I don't know if anyone has any, please hand them to me and I'm happy to include that in the report out to our council as well. But oh yes, and the packets over there, there is the how-to guide. Again, you can see here, you've got agency members. We know it's complicated. We know that there's quite a bit of information that's needed to be able to run a cart. So what we've put together is the guide there with contact information as well. So if you also would like that in an email form, I would say feel free to put a note on the sign-in sheet, and we're happy to email it to you as well. Thank you for coming.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for our panel.